Epicurus is remembered as the philosopher of pleasure, and almost everyone has it backwards. He drank water, ate bread, and warned that most of what you want will never satisfy you. The restlessness you feel after getting what you wanted, the new thing that stops thrilling you within a week, he diagnosed that precisely, around 300 BC, in a garden outside Athens. He believed the problem was not that you want too little. It's that you never learn to sort your desires. Some are natural. Some are empty. And confusing the two is why comfort so rarely becomes peace. In this video we will examine his 3 categories of desire, and which 2 you can safely ignore. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe. Every video here is built around an idea worth your time. In his surviving letter to Menoeceus, Epicurus writes that we do everything for the sake of being free from pain and fear, and that most human misery comes from wanting the wrong things with great intensity. Consider a common evening. You finish a project you chased for months, and for one afternoon it feels like arrival, and then, by the next morning, the mind has already moved to the next thing, faintly dissatisfied. Epicurus watched this same pattern in the Athens of his day, where men accumulated wealth and honors and remained visibly anxious. What he concluded is that desire has a structure, and that most people never examine it. Because they treat every want as equally worth pursuing, they exhaust themselves chasing things that could never have delivered calm in the first place. This is the core of his philosophy, and it is the opposite of the caricature. He argued that pleasure is the beginning and end of the good life, but he defined pleasure narrowly, as the absence of physical pain and the absence of mental disturbance. Not stimulation. Not accumulation. The Greek word he used for the goal was ataraxia, mind without turbulence. And yet this raises a harder problem, because if calm is the goal, why do we spend our lives chasing things that break it? Around 306 BC, Epicurus bought a modest property outside the walls of Athens and turned it into a school he called simply the garden. This was a deliberate rejection of the marketplace, the assembly, the competition for reputation that consumed Athenian life. He and his students grew vegetables, ate plainly, and talked, and notably, the garden admitted women and at least one enslaved person named mice, which scandalized his contemporaries. I think that detail matters more than it first appears, because it shows the philosophy was not theatrical austerity. It was a practical experiment in how little a human being actually needs to be content. Diogenes Laertius, writing centuries later, preserved the report that Epicurus lived on bread and water and considered a pot of cheese a luxury for special occasions. What this reveals is a method, not merely a mood. Epicurus was testing, in his own daily life, which desires were genuinely necessary and which were inflated by habit and opinion. That test produced a distinction so sharp it can reorganize how you think about everything you pursue. But to use it, you first have to hear the categories exactly as he drew them. In the letter to Menoeceus, and in the fragments known as the Principal Doctrines, Epicurus divides all human desires into 3 kinds. First, desires that are natural and necessary, food when you are hungry, water when you are thirsty, shelter, safety, friendship, and freedom from pain and fear. Second, desires that are natural but not necessary, the same needs, but escalated, not food, but elaborate food, not shelter, but a mansion. Third, desires that are neither natural nor necessary, wealth for its own sake, fame, power, political glory. The genius here is the sorting principle. Because natural and necessary desires are easy to satisfy and, once met, they stay quiet. Here I should correct an assumption I used to hold. I thought Epicurus wanted us to eliminate desire entirely, like a Buddhist monk. I was wrong. He wanted us to satisfy the necessary ones and stop obeying the rest. A simple meal ends hunger as completely as a banquet, but the banquet, enjoyed regularly, breeds a craving for banquets, and now you have manufactured a new pain. Which brings us to the misunderstanding that has followed his name for 2,000 years. The word Epicurean now means a lover of fine dining and sensual excess, which is almost exactly the reverse of what Epicurus taught. This distortion began early. Later Roman moralists, and eventually Christian critics, painted the garden as a den of gluttony, partly because Epicurus denied the gods intervene in human life and denied that death should be feared. It was easier to smear him as a pig wallowing in pleasure than to answer his arguments. And yet the man's actual counsel was closer to frugality than feasting. In one preserved letter he asks a friend to send him a small pot of cheese so that he might, in his words, indulge himself when he wishes, a line that only reads as extravagant if you have never noticed how little he otherwise consumed. What he understood, and what the caricature misses, is that maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain are not the same project. Chasing intense pleasures reliably increases pain, because each pleasure raises the baseline of what you now require. Honestly, this is the part that convinces me he was right: the more elaborate your comforts, the more fragile your calm. Which points directly at the desires he considered the most dangerous of all. The third category, desires neither natural nor necessary, was, for Epicurus, the true source of human misery, and his reason is precise. These desires have no natural ceiling. Hunger tells you when to stop, you eat, and it falls silent. But the desire for wealth never signals enough, the desire for status never rests, and the desire for power expands to fill whatever you feed it. In the Principal Doctrines he writes that nothing is enough for the man to whom enough is too little. Picture the familiar modern version, the raise that felt decisive until you learned what a colleague earns, the recognition that thrilled for an afternoon and then demanded the next recognition. These are not failures of effort. They are structural. You are chasing a target that recedes precisely as fast as you approach it, and Epicurus saw that the anxiety this produces is not a side effect, it is the thing itself. What this means practically is that the pursuit of unlimited desires is not a path to satisfaction that happens to fail. It is a path to permanent dissatisfaction that occasionally disguises itself as progress. And that leaves one honest question: how do you tell, in your own life, which desire is which? The whole argument reduces to a single skill Epicurus practiced daily: sorting your wants before you obey them. So here is the practice, in 3 steps. First, when you feel a strong desire, name it and ask whether not having it would cause you real pain, or only the loss of a pleasant extra. Second, if it's natural and necessary, satisfy it simply and let it go quiet. Third, if it's a desire with no natural limit, more money, more status, more approval, recognize that feeding it will not end it, and choose to want less instead of chasing more. That is the whole of Epicurean freedom, not getting everything you want, but wanting only what can actually be satisfied. Peace, he argued, is not the reward for winning the race, it is what you find when you notice the race was never going to end. Philosophy is not an academic exercise. It is the art of living well. Subscribe if you want to keep at it. And if you want something concrete to take with you, there is a free Stoic starter kit in the description, 20 timeless quotes, a 7-day routine, and a printable journal. Any books mentioned today are also linked below.